Greetings and welcome, everybody. My name is David Danto. I'm your host on this IMCCA end of year predictions, wrap up, everything kind of thrown into a bottle webcast. And I'm joined by 5 industry analysts and good friends, and I'd like to go through them and have them introduce themselves one at a time. Let's see the order that it's on here right now. Why don't we start with Blair? Introduce yourself, tell everybody what you do.
Sure. I'm Blair Pleasant. I'm president and principal analyst of Confusion. I'm an independent analyst, and I'm also co-founder of BC Strategies, which used to be UC Strategies. So I'm an independent analyst covering unified communications, collaboration, contact center, and everything that falls under the business communications world.
Blair, thank you very much. The next name on my hit list here is Brent. Why don't you say hello to everybody today, Brent?
Thanks, David. My name is Brent Kelly. I am the president and principal analyst at Kelcor. I've been an analyst in this industry since it was born back in about the year 2000. And prior to that, I worked for a vendor who made products and services that put video and audio over IP. And so as a consequence, I've run into every problem known to man on how to try to make these systems and these solutions work. And then I've watched a lot of others have to go through that pain, and on the user side have consulted with a number of people on the kinds of systems that they should put in place. So it's with real pleasure I'm here with you today, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brent. And this is a very special webcast because it's a 3-David webcast, myself and 2 other Davids. David Maldow, you're next on my list. Why don't you give everybody a shout out?
Thanks, Dave. I'm David Maldow, the founder of Let's Do Video. And pre-pandemic, I was another analyst just covering the business video space. But in the last year, I've been doing a lot of production of online events. We're doing our events online now, so we're here to help.
David, great. Thanks very much. And David Smith joining us for the first time. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell everybody what you do, David.
Thanks, David, and great name, by the way. I am David Mario Smith, formerly of Gartner and now founder and principal analyst at Inflow Analysis, and I cover communications collaboration. Funny, my first gig at Gartner was actually covering email messaging, Lotus Notes and the sort. So I go back a little bit.
David, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. And last but certainly not least, my friend Irwin Lazar. Irwin, why don't you give everybody a quick hi and tell everybody what you do?
Sure. Thank you, David. And my name is not David. Hi, I'm Irwin Lazar, Vice President and Service Director at Nemerdes Research. Been an analyst now for going on about 18, 19 years. Started covering the voice space, came to it through networking. So my background prior to that was in network engineering, and have evolved as the voice world has moved more into video and team collaboration, unified communications over the last 10 years or 15 years or so now.
Great, thank you, Irwin. And since we're on you, we were chatting just before we started recording today. You know, I've already done, without exaggerating, like 6 webcasts about predictions for next year and at least 6 or 7 blogs. Before this pandemic happened, what were we predicting this year was going to be about? I know you said you looked it up to make sure, so you can be our check on that. What were we thinking was going to happen this year?
Yeah, so I looked at my 2020 predictions that I wrote at the end of last year, and the first one I had was pandemic. So, you know, I'm pretty excited about getting that. No, seriously, I think it was more. You know, I didn't predict anything revolutionary in 2020. I think it was more evolutionary. The shift toward the cloud, growing use of video, team collaboration becoming more of the front end for how people interface with applications. But more, you know, again, on a slow, we're heading in this direction. You know, maybe we'll go from 20% of folks using video to 35% by the end of the year. I don't think anyone saw the rapid acceleration caused by the pandemic.
Absolutely. Blair, what about your predictions for this year?
Yeah, similar to Irwin, a lot of it was, you know, building on and building momentum. But I think one thing we talked about was the use of AI and how that's going to be more prevalent in, you know, communications, collaboration, contact center, and I think we definitely did see that. So I don't think anyone predicted the pandemic, but I think we all predicted more use of AI, and we definitely saw that. And of course, we all predicted more use of video, which, you know, we didn't quite expect it to this level or this degree. But I think a lot of what we did predict last year just got accelerated. You know, we talked about the move to the cloud. And that happened way more quickly than anyone expected, you know, and same for the use of video. You know, everyone had to use video. So we expected a slower progression toward it, and instead of it just, you know, happening, boom.
Yeah.
David Smith, you had some comments as well?
Yeah, and for me, same as everyone already. So I've been predicting. We've been saying video's going to grow next year, right? And so we've been predicting. So we're bound to be right. We didn't really know how right we would be, this year. And I think, with the pandemic and gosh, the boost of people like Zoom and so forth, we definitely saw that going crazy. I was also predicting team collaboration, having more of an impact this year as well. So I think we're seeing that happening, and also was looking at, I think, experiences having a big impact on just overall technology investments and spending. We began to see that happening as well too this year.
Excellent.
So I
Mr.
think
Mal.
that
Oh, go ahead.
I think the pandemic really made us all look like we knew what we were talking about, because everything we predicted just happened way more quickly. So it really made us look smart.
David Maldow, you had one comment you wanted to add there as well?
I think, basically a lot of our predictions were right, but just more right than we knew because of the pandemic, the growth. One thing I love in particular is that we were predicting that video would become more fun. All of us for our entire careers have been trying to help people make video work because it was so hard, and video all of a sudden it got really easy and reliable, and the 3 o'clock meeting starts at 3 o'clock because you just click a link and you're in. So people are starting to have, transcription and all these fun things that help us do business. We predicted that, but there was one prediction. I think it was the thing that I wrote most about and predicted the heaviest, and it couldn't have been more wrong. My biggest prediction was huddle. We're going to cram as many people as we can into these tiny little rooms. We're going to sit on each other's laps. We're going to breathe the same air. We'll drink out of the same coffee mugs, and we'll get all our work done. And all of a sudden, we're still using these systems, but the 3-person huddle room is a 1-person phone booth working station. The 8-person huddle space is a 3-person huddle space. And I don't think we're using the word huddle. What are we calling these things now? We're going back to calling them room kits?
Well, David, that's interesting because we can joke about it, but the truth is we've probably seen the death of the huddle room, not just because of a disease. The point of the huddle room was to have a place to go because you were all crowded into these packed open office areas. And I think working remotely has essentially put the nail in the coffin of the open office areas. We've now learned for the most part that knowledge workers can work remotely more effectively than if they have this silly commute to and from an office when they're working by themselves. So we will go into offices to do group things, camaraderie and decisions and meetings and to meet with colleagues. But when we've got to sit down at a desk and compose or write or crunch numbers, we're not even going to go to the office, so we don't really need the huddle room. We're now going to work from the personal systems. But I'm jumping ahead of myself here. It's just a good point to make that I don't think that I think we've the huddle room and the open office are two casualties of the dumpster fire that 2020 has become. I don't know if anybody would agree with that, but that's certainly how I feel.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the open office becomes the huddle room, just like you said. We're in the process right now of gathering research for a study that's looking at what are companies planning for next year. And at this point, I haven't seen anyone that's saying, yeah, we want to bring everybody back. If they're going to bring people back, it's going to be at their own preference, because there are some people who would rather be in an office and would rather not work from home, or people are going to come back, one day a month or one day a week or whatever works for them when they do need to get together. So that open office now is that space where maybe a few people get in. I think the other reality is there will never be an environment where everyone is together. So if if you've gone to the office because you like to work in an office and you're having a meeting, you're still on video. You're still sitting in front of a camera, because most of the people I think you're working with are not in the office with you. They're still at home.
If I could just make a comment on what we've been talking about, there's a concept called the black swan. And I read a book a few years ago from a gentleman named Nassim Taleb, who talked about black swan events, and it's completely unexpected things that happen. And the COVID-19 pandemic was one of those. And David Danto, in relation to what you were talking about with respect to the huddle room, I think we all had high hopes and high predictions for the efficacy and how broadly video was going to be deployed in these huddle rooms. I think where my mind is on this is that as this black swan event or the COVID-19 winds down, assuming that these vaccines that are now becoming available, as those get widespread, I have a sense that next year, yes, we'll do a lot of things remotely, and probably in 2022, that trend will still be there to some extent. But I suspect that because we're social animals to an extent, we like generally to be with people. I think maybe the huddle room prediction just needs to be postponed for a few years. And the open office, while it's kind of going away right now, I suspect that will return once we have overcome the difficulties with COVID-19. So I guess I would just say that we're just doing a shift, at least in that particular market segment of the huddle room, for 2 to 3 years, and then I see personally that it will be coming back.
Well, Brent, let's pause that comment just for a second, because I want to talk about what happened this year, and then I want to get into predictions for the future. And that's a healthy topic for us to bring up and debate in terms of what the future office is going to look like and why. But let's pivot for a second now, and let's talk about what actually happened this year and what we will be basing those trends on. I will only close out the last year's predictions part of this conversation by pointing out to everybody one of my key hits and one of my key misses. I was very, and Irwin, you and David, Dave Maldow, you and I and Irwin and I have argued quite a bit about this concept of the team chat, and I really felt it was a solution looking for a problem, and that nobody really needed it. And then, wow, the pandemic certainly was a problem that came along and made needing to collaborate on these platforms really important. And as we record this, we just heard that Salesforce just bought Slack, and I think these chat and collaboration platforms clearly prove me wrong that they're going to have a long future in terms of what's going on. But I will point out, and hopefully if I'm smart enough, I've put it on the bottom of the screen right now, that I did predict that a pandemic like this would happen in a blog, which is still public on that link, back in 2014. I warned companies to look at the warning signs and be aware that when these things happen, we need to be prepared to send everybody home. Now, Lord knows I didn't think it was going to be for a year, but I am one of the people that did predict the pandemic, so I'll take some credit for that. So turning the page on both of those and getting into what happened this year, the idea that video is now finally pervasive and collaboration works and nobody's talking about how difficult it is anymore was certainly one of the things that moved our industry past its old point into the new one. This idea that we were having these fights about who had more daily users and how do you count a daily user and what's going on with it, and then whether this concept that Zoom is now a verb. It's the application of the year as we start recording this for the folks that have tablets, and there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things that happened this pandemic that we're just never going back from. Anybody care to comment about like those topics we were talking about early on, remote working, and these various applications and platforms and scaling to the cloud? We were talking about this in March and April. How did this year play out with all of those?
Yeah, I think for me, I'll go. I think that significant. I think with the remote working and the pandemic, the whole culture of work changed. For organizations, and so I guess that need for collaboration just really became front and center. You mentioned before the Salesforce acquisition of Slack, right? I mean, what's interesting to me was that Slack hadn't experienced that pandemic boost or bump that say like a Zoom had experienced, right? And so part of that I think was how critical real-time collaboration video became, and because we all had to work from home, and so vendors who had real-time video soared, like a Microsoft or Google and Zoom, as you mentioned.
And Blue Jeans, also this year closed the sale to Verizon. That took place entirely over video, remotely. Blue Jeans had been around for a long time, and that's one of the largest sales that ever took place, completely negotiated remotely. I'm sure it's not the last, especially considering some of the other M&A that we've been seeing going on. It's interesting how, video and collaboration became the tool that we all depend on.
Well, one thing I find interesting is we've gone from, video works to now we've got video fatigue, and now the big thing is trying to overcome, meeting fatigue, Zoom fatigue, whatever you want to call it. So we've got, all these companies are doing things now like Microsoft Teams introduced the gallery view, and Zoom introduced Zoom Room Smart Gallery. So everyone's trying to find ways to really improve the experience now, so we can get over that whole fatigue issue. And we're seeing emoticons and voting and different things to really make it more inclusive and make it more fun, because people are just tired of these, back-to-back meetings and, and all these new terms that came up, Zoomerang because of back-to-back meetings. So we have a whole new vocabulary now and a whole new, everything based on these meetings. And I just find it interesting that we went from, okay, people are starting to use it to, oh my God, we're using it too much. What do we do now?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you think about how, we used to live in this bubble, I think, of collaboration, and, Zoom now is something everybody uses. And I hear more Zoom meetings outside of work than I ever, than I probably see in work. I think, one of the areas that I think that the work from home environment is exposed on the negative side of collaboration is, we can have effective meetings if we want to talk to one another, if we want to chat about something. But what's missing from that home worker environment has been the ability for us to do what we do when we meet in person, which is stand up and start sketching things out on a whiteboard and start throwing out some ideas and capturing them. There really hasn't been a good substitute yet for doing that at home. And what we're starting to see is a lot of interest in the companies like Miro and Mural and Klaxon and even Microsoft Whiteboard and others that are emerging to sort of step into that void and say, you know what, we're going to give you a canvas that you can use from an ideation standpoint, from a journey mapping standpoint, and have that be something that's living not just in the meeting but outside it. People can come back and work on it in their own time and asynchronously and so on. So I think if I'm looking at one of the unexpected things I've heard over the last year has been this rise now among the enterprise folks I talk to in, we need something for work collaboration, ideation collaboration, et cetera.
So to jump in with what you started the discussion with this kind of year, one of the things that happened this year is we proved chat, right? I've been such a huge fan of chat. I've been going crazy about chat. And I think part of the reason is because chat shines with remote teams. And Let's Do Video is a remote team, 6 years now, completely remote. I've met my team in person 2 or 3 times, and we live on chat. And I think a lot of people didn't see the need for chat because I'm at the office with someone. If I want to, if I'm across the hall from Irwin and I need to, hey, Irwin, what do you want to do for lunch? I don't need chat for that. It's ridiculous. And, when we really want to work, we go into the meeting room. We get on video. Where does chat fit in? And chat is the hallway. I don't have a hallway. I don't have a water cooler. We actually have a water cooler channel. We call it cahoots. We're in cahoots with each other. So that's our water cooler channel. Don't talk about business in there. That's we're talking about movies and music and stuff. And I live in chat the way people live in their offices. That's how I feel connected. We got to get work done. We hop on video. You can't be chatting at each other. You can't, get real work done. So we spend a good amount of time on video, but without chat, I don't think this business would exist. And I think a lot of people would be having trouble keeping their businesses existing during this pandemic because, it's just to wrap it up, I have a few clients that I actually get to come into chat with me to work on their projects, videos or whatever. Those projects get done at the speed of light. I have some clients that, I don't need to get on chat with you, we'll do it over email. Those projects get done at the speed of email, which is not the speed of light. So I'm hoping that it's just, chat plus video. And I think people are starting to get it.
Well, David, this is interesting that you would say that because one of the things that I've noticed, for many years, I've had a hard time telling my neighbors what I do for a living, being in this unified communication space and so forth. And the interesting thing now is that I can have a conversation with any of my neighbors, and if I just use the word Zoom or if I use the word Microsoft Teams or something, everybody now knows, oh, that's the industry that you're in. And you're working with those people and with companies and individuals and other organizations that use those kinds of things. And so it's really been, in a way, it's been refreshing and uplifting to be able to have conversations with people in my neighborhood that now know what I do. And the other interesting thing that I've seen, so I'm a member of several different organizations, one of which has people who are, I will call them, they're not paid in any way, but they teach others. And they teach youth. And the interesting thing that I've seen is that these people that I would never have expected to become really proficient at using video, they now are able to do this. They can schedule their meetings. They know what the switches mean. They're able to share. They're able to go into breakout rooms. They're able to display video clips, all these kinds of things that I'm seeing people in my own neighborhood do that just 8 months ago, none of them would have been able to know how to do that. And so I just have to give a real shout out to both the vendors who have, as you said, David Danto, made it so that these services have been able to expand and the capacity has expanded so that all these people can get on, but also to those who are doing the user interface design and so forth, because now it's just like, just the regular person is able to use these and be really proficient with them, which to me was a huge surprise that's coming out of this particular year.
Yeah, Brent, I was going to build on exactly what you said. I find it really interesting that, a few years ago, enterprises were getting things from the consumer world. Technologies would start on the consumer side and then they would come into the enterprise world. And now we're finding the opposite. Everyone, and their mother and grandmother, are using Zoom and some of these video technologies. So what started on the enterprise side now went to the consumer side. So we had all these issues about security and privacy because, things that were built for the enterprise weren't necessarily built for, no one was expecting, hacking and, Zoom bombing and things like that. So that brought up, all these other issues that nobody was expecting. So I found that really interesting because, things that were built for one world weren't ready for the other world. And now, as George Costanza would say, our worlds are colliding. And so that's been really interesting this year to see that. And then the whole thing with, virtual backgrounds, it's become, such a cool, at first it was, oh, who really needs this? And now it's, it's just fabulous. And we've seen contests and, competitions about that. So again, trying to make everything more fun is kind of what I got out of video this year, is that, we don't have to dress up for it anymore. It's just something real. I've had video calls with CEOs and CXOs, and they're wearing hoodies and T-shirts, and it's not the big thing that it used to be. So I really like the making video and collaboration and everything real this year. So I'm thankful for that.
Video background is the hottest thing in our industry. It is unbelievable. I have all of these tutorial videos how to do different things with video, and they all, how it is in our industry. We're a small industry. If I get 5,000, 10,000 views, I'm happy. My video on how to do Zoom virtual backgrounds, it's almost 300,000 views now. Everyone is crazy about the virtual back. And one quick thing, at first I was like, who cares? But there was a story that I heard about it that made me really like, okay, now I'm 1,000% behind the virtual backgrounds. My cousin's a teacher. And she said some of her students have really nice rows of toys behind them on the shelves in their bedroom, and some of them don't. And either one of them might not want to share that. It might be embarrassed either way. And with the virtual backgrounds, especially with the not needing a green screen, that anyone can have a virtual background, they're all on the same level. No one's embarrassed. They're all wherever they want to be instead of having to show what they might not want to show. So I'm like, okay. I don't care if they're not perfect. I don't care if it cuts off my ears a little bit. I don't care if it bleeds a little bit. I am a huge fan of the virtual backgrounds.
Well, David, you know that I'm not a big fan of virtual backgrounds. I love that people are using them. I just added Mandalorian holding Grogu back over there, and I keep a pop culture background. Underdog's been with me my entire career, so I'm from the old school of video where you have to have a busy background and a lot of things moving in case anybody wants to call your system for a test. I guess we don't really have to do very much testing because we proved it worked. Let me make one more point about what we learned this year, and then let's move on to predictions and talk about what we think is going to happen next year and the years going forward. The point that I want to make, and it's kind of subtle, if you think back to Marissa Mayer, if you think back to Hewlett Packard, if you think back to when Patrick Pichette was with Google, all of this demonizing and scapegoating of the remote worker. We're going to bring everybody back into the office. The remote workers are lazy. The remote workers, are not, they're not contributing. That'll solve our problems. We now have proven, not just with the 3, 4, 5 years ago, the Stanford University study that showed that remote workers are more productive. We've now proven that when everybody is remote, it's not that we're working less. We can't tear ourselves away. We're so engrossed. We have the Zoom fatigue and video fatigue. We know that remote workers are more productive now, and we've completely dropped a bomb on that scapegoating BS that we've been dealing with. But now that we've done it this much, of course we had to, we have learned both positive and negative things about this modality for working. And yes, I'm very pleased that this thing that I and many of you guys have been predicting for 15, 20 years is now true, and that collaboration is true collaboration from anywhere doing anything. But we've learned things about human communication and remote working that we didn't know. For example, company culture works beautifully over video when it's top-down culture, when it's the CEO or the managing director telling everybody on a 3, 4, 10, 50,000 person call, this is the direction we're going, and that communication is fine. It works beautifully, even with the Q&A bidirectionally. But the things that we used to do in the office when we met with somebody, like ask about their kids or get a sense of that we're working with people, that doesn't happen organically on these tools. You have to create it, whether that's creating, once a day or once a week coffee chats over video where you're not allowed to talk about business, or David, your team channel that you're using to talk about, not allowed to talk about business, or things like, photo contests or family pictures or something. We're going to need to learn to foster that level of camaraderie when we're using completely remote. I'm sure in the future, after the vaccines, we won't be completely remote. There are times when, we're coming in to deal with the company's quarterly situation. Well, let's all go into the office. I'll get a flight. We'll all meet there. We'll have some great meals. We'll be together. But I don't have to be there every day. It's still something that we need to fix. And we also need to fix people that I call this the flush test. When people wanted to test their setups remotely at home, they'd bring up a tablet and they'd stick, an earbud in their ear, and they'd call their colleague and say, yeah, you see me, I see you, great, this works, I have it in case of an emergency. Nobody ever envisioned, they called this in the Apollo days, failure of imagination. Nobody ever envisioned the idea that when we were working from home, everybody in our home would be working from home. So my wife would be on her calls, my college students would be on their calls, younger kids would be watching video. And from an enterprise perspective, everybody would be remote at the same time. We've got to bring in all this bandwidth at the same time. Nobody envisioned that. And I think going forward in the future, we're now going to, the whole idea of business continuity has also had a bomb dropped on it. And we're going to have to do this flush test, come up with formulas for how much bandwidth people need in their homes. And it's not enough just to have a cheap earbud, but do we need good quality headsets and good lighting and a decent camera? A lot of this, we're going to start to see personal products come to the market specifically to address this and to let an enterprise manage it in the near future. So I've been talking and not looking. Does anybody have any comments on that before we go into next year's predictions?
Well, David, I would like to disagree.
Go ahead,
Oh, sorry. I'd like to disagree with one thing you said. As far as the personalization, I think we actually have more of it on some of these video calls. You see kids coming into a room and interrupting, or you hear a kid in the background. It's like, oh, how old is your kid? Or, oh, what kind of dog do you have? Or, I like that poster you have in the background, or whatever. So I think we've actually had more personalization. And I've read articles about people who said, I've worked, in an office next to so-and-so for years, and, I never asked about their kids. And now, I see their kids in the background, and, I feel like I get to know them better. So I think there is more of that going on now than there was in the past.
Fair point. Go ahead, Irwin.
Yeah, I think the big challenge that companies are having now is understanding what the mentality or stress points or how people that are working from home are feeling. And that's an area where, from a collaboration software standpoint, we're not really worried about that kind of thing. And HR didn't really worry about it and so on. So the area that I think companies are struggling with is how do we get the analytics to understand, who's connected, who's engaged, who's not. And I think if you saw this morning, Microsoft had introduced a productivity tool that allowed managers to look at individually who was using what and how often were they engaging in chats and things like that. Really interesting information if you're trying to understand, do I have people who work from home who just don't really feel like they're part of the team anymore? Of course, they shot it this morning because there are all sorts of privacy related issues related to the ability to know exactly what people were doing. But I think that kind of analytics and that kind of information is going to be critical. Especially understanding the different generations. I've seen some research that looks at, people right out of college, they want to be in an office. They want to interact with people. They want to be noticed. People who are, where I am, and I think most of you, in our lives, we much prefer to be at home and not have that commute and have that time to, pursue hobbies and be with our kids and so on. So, I think analytics and insight, understanding of how the workforce is adapting from home is really a critical need right now.
Blair, and I think so too. And one of the topics that's sort of related to that is how can you judge or measure the emotional health of people that are in your workforce or even students? And as an example, we're hearing some discussion and some there's different points of view on this, but the idea that students learning from home is that is worse than going to school and facing the problem, maybe bringing COVID back with you or something like that. And I think that's an unsolved problem. Is given that we've all been at home, and not only that, but we can't go out. There's not other ways to recharge ourselves to some extent. Go to restaurants or to go to ballparks or to do all these other things that recharge our batteries emotionally. I think that's one of the things that we do need to look out for and we need to worry about. And Irwin, you're just mentioning that there's some companies that are looking at sort of emotional health, but I think that's a big issue. And I think the longer this pandemic goes on and the longer that we are required to not socially interact or not have these other outlets to release emotional energy or to recharge ourselves emotionally, I think that's an issue that we're facing now and we will face into the future if we continue to stay home or continue to have to work remotely.
Yeah, let me say something. This is such a real issue. I'm seeing so my wife works in HR, so I overhear things I probably shouldn't overhear. but but we're seeing a lot of mental health issues. But I think as the companies are changing now, they're looking at people as people, not as people as workers. And so their well-being, their mental health is becoming much more important and significant as a part of their overall work. And I think HR as a whole, I'm seeing now taking that into a lot more context.
And you guys have all made my point, the last one that I made, and that now that we've broken through this, demonization of remote workers and we've broken through this does video work and we're at the point where we've got mass adoption, we are now looking at things we never looked at before. Well-being, mental health, stressors, all the rest of this. We've graduated. What's the expression that came up was 6 years of digital transformation in 6 months, or 8 years and 8 months, or whatever your metric is. But I think we have come a long way despite all the challenges this year. So now I'm going to pivot and I'm going to go back to the topic that Brent was talking about earlier, that we were all talking about, which is, we've got a little under a half hour left if we use our full 60 minutes over here. Let's talk about what we think is going to happen. I'm going to put a couple of things out there since I'm the host and I get to call the shots. But I've been talking about describing the pandemic and our experiences this year essentially as one of those fun, fancy, complicated domino artwork things where we've now seen somebody knock over the first 3 dominoes, and that's all we've seen. But there's no way in the world, inevitably, just like gravity, that whole rest of the puzzle is going down. That's the way I see how the future is coming. And a few of these points, and I'd really love you guys to step in when I get through all of them and give me your thoughts on mine and your own. But, I think the office, the way we've experienced it in the past, is dead. I think the concept of having 50 floors in a big city and everybody has to commute to it to do individual work is never going to happen again. Not just because I love remote working like an old guy, like you said, or like we do, but because now that companies realize that this is productive, they don't need to spend the real estate for the 50 floors. They can do it in 20, they can do it in 15, or ones that had 15 can do it in 3, and it doesn't have to be in New York and San Francisco and Austin anymore. Now we're going to see smaller offices much more dispersed. So we will go to an office to collaborate when we don't want to be at home, when we want to see people, when we want to brainstorm and whiteboard, as you said, Irwin. But we will do it in these smaller offices, and these meeting spaces, instead of being like 30% of the office, are now going to be something like 70% of the office. 30% of the office will be desktops that are primarily for touchdown, for when people are not there all the time and they'll use them. So a lot more meeting rooms, a lot more technology in the meeting rooms, because after all, we're going to still need to communicate with all of these satellite offices and all the people that are still home. This concept of hybrid working and hybrid teaching and telehealth, this is here to stay. We will be where we need to be for any given reason and use the tool that's there. Sometimes that's in an office with colleagues. Sometimes it's at an airport. Sometimes it's at our home. So I believe business travel is going to pick up again. After we get past this ramp and fear and everything else, people will visit clients. They'll eventually go to business conferences, which is actually a topic I want to bring up here because I don't know how quickly those will survive. But we will travel where we need to travel. What we won't do is spend an hour and a half on a sweaty train and then a subway going into an office tower to sit at our desk and work at our desk all day, just in the hopes that maybe we might bump into somebody. That's not going to fly anymore. Now we will just do what we need to do. So those are pretty much a summary of my 10, 12 predictions boiled down to like 3 or 4. Why don't you guys chime in one at a time? Let me know, do you agree with that, and how do you see the world and the predictions going forward after this?
I can go first if no one wants to jump in. First of all, I agree with all of that. Maybe some of the details, that the percentage of the rooms in 15 floors instead of 50 floors, but I agree that it's not a matter of what it used to be in the old days, which was, okay, I have this rock star employee. She is so good. I can't let my competitors have her. And she refuses to come to the office more than 2 days a week. She can work remotely 3 days. She's that good. But it's a sacrifice. I'm not getting as much work out of her as I should. Now, like you said, we've proven ourselves. The joke we've been saying for even before the pandemic, is the most productive member of your team is wearing pajamas. And so now bosses aren't saying, okay, I'll let you stay home half the week because I'm a nice boss. They're saying, well, just stay home half the week because I make more money that way. And that's what bosses like to do. So we are going to be on video a lot more. And there is actually one trend that I've been seeing this year already as people are accepting the fact that they're going to be on video. And this goes into what Blair's been talking about, which is making it more fun. I've been doing a lot of producing, and I think the bellwether is online events. What we're seeing now in online events, we're going to start seeing trickling down into meetings, because online events have to be fun. I used to see you people, everyone in this call, like 4 or 5 times a year. Last time I saw any of you was ISE. So everything's been virtual, and it's been hit and miss. And for the first, and I've been doing a lot of consulting with it, and for the first half of the year, people were saying, David, we used to be in Vegas, now we're online. Log into my Blue Jeans account for me and make sure my Blue Jeans webinar settings are right. They just want to do a vanilla webinar. And after 6 months of vanilla webinars all day long, every day, people are ready for something fun. So now they're starting to look for ways to make it fun. And I'm doing, let's see if this even works. I'm producing a trivia contest tonight. It's a Santa trivia contest for the deaf community. So everyone's going to be signing, so we have to zoom in. So this is going to set up, and I put Blair as a placeholder for my host, and Irwin as a placeholder for the guests. And we have questions, popping up. And I cannot wait for tonight. And I mean, I'm not going to, we got all sorts of Christmassy backgrounds and all sorts of fun things going, and I'm not going to waste all of your time with it. But I cannot wait for it. The people that are doing this event cannot wait for it. We want this. And if video wasn't so easy and it didn't work so well, you know what this would have been? It would have been a regular Zoom or Blue Jeans meeting, and they would have said, okay, who's answering the next question? And it still would have been fun, but So I think that now that we're comfortable, we've had a year on video. We're going to start getting a little experimental. We're going to start having some fun.
I think they'll also stand out. They'll also stand out a little bit more because we don't have to be on video, which I think will be great once this thing is over. So David Smith wanted to go, and then Blair, you wanted to go. So David, why don't you go first, and then Blair?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're definitely going to see, obviously, this sort of switch towards more hybrid working, more video. Gosh, my home office now has sort of become like a semi quasi TV studio. I've got lights now and stuff and microphones. It's crazy now. I feel like a host or something. I'm doing more virtual events, like you, David. But everything sort of transformed, and I think further transformation is coming in waves. I guess we'll see more hybrid environment of work with flexible mix of work from home and in the office. And I think the speed at which that's happening will definitely be dependent on, I guess, public health advances from vaccines and so forth. But I think we have learned to adjust to a pandemic and realize that what we thought was normal maybe wasn't all that normal. So workplace technology, I think adoption will continue to increase as it will be necessary, for connection and collaboration. There are some regional differences, though. I know here in the Bay Area, we went to work from home, immediately, right? Companies like Facebook, they sort of mandated work from home, and then now they're doing in different regions, where you can actually work in whatever region you want. With the caveat being that your salary obviously will be adjusted, for the region you're in, right? You won't make a Bay Area salary in Atlanta or Raleigh-Durham, right? So we're going to see those things. I'm also hearing some rumblings of companies that are trying to figure out what they're going to do with their real estate. So I think we may see some WeWorkish type moves with some companies, leasing out office space and what have you.
So I want to build on what Dave Maldow said as far as taking these video events and doing more with them. So just this week, I had a virtual conference yesterday, followed by a chocolate and wine tasting. And tomorrow I've got another virtual conference, and it's going to be followed by a wine tasting. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I was saying, I think I'm the only person whose drinking has actually gone down because I'm not traveling as much. But now it's starting to pick up again because people are trying to make these virtual events, back to the having fun with it, as we were talking about before. One thing I do see changing is when people are back in the office is the focus on safety. We've seen, people taking temperatures and stuff like that, but using technology, we're starting to see more, touchless and hands-free type things, using Alexa and Siri to control, meeting rooms and, how many people are in the room, and, so using AI to determine how many people are in the room and, is the proximity okay and things like that. So I think we are going to see the use of technology in the next few years, in the coming year, as people do go back into the office, to really make sure that meetings are going to be safe, the environment is going to be safe. So that's going to open up a whole new area, which I think is going to be really interesting. And we're starting to see, beginnings of it. Cisco's given demos about things, and but we talk about voice being back. I think voice control is going to be really, really big in the coming year.
And Blair, the menial things that we would typically do in these rooms, I can't tell you how many times as a consultant that I would have video interviews with companies, and when I would connect to their rooms, I'd be getting a great shot of their knees under the table because nobody knew how to pick up the remote or use the touch panel to make a shot, and nobody felt like it. Well, you know what? That is not necessary anymore now. The systems that are being built by major manufacturers are smart enough to know, okay, this person's talking and that person's talking. We're going to make a good shot. There's noise coming from a vacuum cleaner or an air conditioner. We're going to filter that out. A lot of that machine learning and AI is going to vastly improve our room experiences by the time we go back into them, and that's something the industry is doing great. So, Brent, you were next on this one. You had some comments about what we said before?
Yeah, I did, and to kind of go along with what Blair was saying, I've got an article coming out of nojitter.com either tomorrow or Friday that talks about this idea of zero-touch joins when you want to go into a meeting, and the idea being that, well, it kind of plays into this idea. We're going to be germaphobes, essentially, when we go back into the office. We've learned not to touch stuff. And so I think there's some really interesting technologies that are coming. Voice commands are some of them. We're seeing people that are able to, do QR codes and control a meeting from their smartphone and all these kinds of things. I think those are going to be big. But something that David Smith was saying is important too, and that is this idea of how do you help people learn with video, and how do you make sure that messages are getting across in the best way? And just an example, something that I have seen, I have some of my grandkids are living in my home, and I have been able to see how different teachers teach, and the way that happens, there are orders of magnitude difference in how effective different individuals are when they're trying to get a message across. And this kind of plays in what David Maldow was saying too about making things fun and doing things. And I think we're going to see remote events, much like the one Blair was talking about that happened earlier today. They're going to be shorter. They're going to be more to the point. There will be some fun stuff that may happen as part of that. But the other thing that I think that we're going to be looking at is one of the things that I've noticed, again, I'm part of an organization where we do help youth and we teach youth on different topics, and a number of times I'll see that the youth are not participating, and I'll see dark screens where they haven't turned on their video, or if they have turned on their video, you can tell that they're really not paying attention. And I think we're going to see a lot of work in that area of how to teach better when you're using video. I think that's a really huge area that needs a lot of work and a lot of improvement, a lot of social study kinds of things, psychology kinds of things, and so forth. But that would be a prediction that I would make, is how do you make these meetings better for youth, for adults, for all the different people, for the audiences that you're going to be working with. I would say that's going to be something that's going to be huge.
Brent, I think that reinforces a point that I've made a couple of times in presentations this year. I agree with you 100%. And I make the parallel that when radio was around and gave way to television, 1930s, 1940s, the first content on television were people reading radio scripts in front of microphones on camera, and it didn't work. It was terrible because it was a new medium and it requires a new content. The majority of teachers that went into remote teaching essentially sat in front of a webcam giving lesson plans on a webcam, and it didn't work because it was a new medium and it required new content. Now, there are some fabulous distance learning studios that have existed 20, 30 years going back, over satellite, over video, with multiple cameras and lots of great graphics, and those were fine. But every K through 12 and higher ed person spent the summer thinking we were going to be out of this pandemic instead of preparing for this future. And starting to use great technologies, like one of the devices that's out there on the market that you can just put on a student's desk and it'll track a teacher as they walk across the front of the room, really inexpensive. We are going to need to develop new skills and new content for hybrid learning, because there's no reason why we can't have students in a classroom and students at home gaining the same thing from the lessons. I think that developing that skill is something. This was our warning shot. We better not blow our shot the second time. And you're right, it's going to need to improve. So totally agree with you, 100%. Irwin, you had a point you wanted to make, and then I'm going to go around and give everybody their last shot at their biggest prediction of the year that we'll check back on next year and see if we got right or not.
Sure. Yeah, I think I definitely echo what everybody else said. I think David Maldow is going to be really busy in the next year. As people start looking for that, how do I make video a little bit better than just the talking head staring at a camera? But I think one other point I'd say that we're seeing companies really starting to think about as they're moving into 21 is, do I have the right mix of applications? I went into this in March and April and said, go home, grab whatever you want. You've got all different kinds of business units adopting different apps. And now most of the conversations I'm having with my clients are focused around cost, security, governance, compliance, and platform. And they're looking at, do I really need 6 different video apps, or should I harmonize on one? And obviously, we've seen a lot of momentum behind Microsoft, and we've seen Google, kind of up their game a little bit. The Slack acquisition somewhat takes Slack out of the game as a standalone, will be the bridge to everyone. Pull Zoom in, pull all different other kinds of applications in. You've got RingCentral and some of the other UCaaS providers that have also built very complete platforms. So I think we're moving a little bit from a market standpoint, from a best of breed to one where, what's the right platform, and then how do I build workflows on top of that? How do I build analytics and management and so on? So I think the conversation over the next 6 months of the year is going to be a lot more focused around platform versus let's keep doing what we're doing and grabbing all the different tools that are out there.
Yeah, and organizing these platforms so that enterprises can actually manage the remote employees and the remote tools much more productively. So I agree with that. And in fact, let's switch ourselves over to this last part. I want everybody to take out their crystal balls. I always love the crystal balls time. And let's make one prediction that we will certainly regret when we play this back next year. I'll start, and then I'll go to David Smith. My prediction is that the manufacturing cycle for most companies is 9 months, to 14 months nowadays as things are going, and this pandemic is now just about 9 months old. So I think we are going to start to see products hitting the market that are built for personal use. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or know anything NDA. I think that we are going to start to see this entire trend. Conversations I had with the research team at CES, at CEA. CES will be virtual this year, but we all believe that this work from home is going to be a sector, and this personal device system, this is going to be something that grows really strongly going forward. So that's my big prediction for next year. David Smith, what's yours?
I think with we're sort of switching now, obviously the remote, and which will be hybrid, I think we're going to see new forms of collaboration. So I think we'll see some companies start switching from video to, wait for it, voice.
Voice makes a comeback. I know that a lot of people that are going to love hearing that. That's a great prediction, great news. We'll see if that one comes true. Blair, where are you? What's your biggest prediction for the year coming forward?
Hugs are going to come back. We talked earlier about being social
Eh,
creatures. I think I think we're going to be back in the office more than people expect because people miss that socialization. We are social creatures. As much as this has been, I've been working at home for 30 years, so it doesn't really bother me. But I think people really miss that interaction. And I think once there are vaccines and people can be back in the office, I think a lot of them are going to do that because we just miss that socialization.
Okay, good prediction. We'll see how that one turns out. Mr. Maldo, what's your big prediction for next
All
year?
right, I'm actually going to flip it up. I'm usually very positive, and as a fan of video, there's a lot to be positive, and it's been a terrible year, but video's kind of been a life raft. It actually, just in time, it worked well enough to save us. But I'm going to be negative, so that way, if I'm wrong, I'll be happy. And here's my snarky, obnoxious, terrible negative prediction: is that I'm going to spend another year staring at a webcam instead of staring at your faces because no one's going to invent a monitor that magically has a camera behind it. So I would love to look at all your beautiful faces, but I'm going to spend another year looking right into my webcam.
Well, I did read that one of the platform companies is actually working on technology to kind of fake it and bend it. But I'm with you. I spend most of my webcasts now looking in the camera as well because we're pros. You can tell that's a difference. That's a good prediction. I hope it doesn't turn out to be true, David, but we'll see where it goes. Brent, what's your biggest shot for next year?
Well, I think companies are going to be doing a lot of rationalization. It's kind of been a free-for-all heretofore of, let's just get through this pandemic. And I think Irwin kind of mentioned this of let's get through the pandemic. You guys, everybody, just go do what you need to do so that we can continue to function. And I think when people come back, they're going to, there's going to be serious looks at what's going on, and there's going to be, I'll say, some more oversight. The other interesting thing that I think would just be awesome, and maybe David Danto, you know of some companies that are doing this, but the idea of, I won't say holographic images, but the idea of using LiDAR or something that will allow us to have more than just a two-dimensional view of somebody, something that would allow us to have this three-dimensional kind of view so that it's a little more personal than just seeing someone in a flat screen. There may be some ways coming that would do that. And so I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, Brent, that's an interesting point. And we talk about winners and losers during this pandemic. Again, not talking about the horrific health situation, but it was amazing that video and home internet broadband and the technologies that we use for collaboration really stepped up and were ready. I'm stunned at how unready AR and VR technologies were. I mean, we should be having these meetings like Jedi councils, with the holographs next to us, even wearing goggles. And boy, was that a technology that completely fell flat on its face during a good opportunity. So maybe it'll be ready for the next one. Praying we don't have a next one, but really good point. When am I going to be able to meet with Yoda and Mace Windu, as pop-up holograms going forward? Good points there. Irwin, let's give you the last one. What do you think is going to be your big prediction for next year?
Yeah, I think too. First off, the office is never going to be the same. I do agree with Blair and some others that people really do want. Not everyone, but there's a percentage of folks who do want to go back at least some part of the week. I don't think we ever go back, like David you mentioned, where everyone's commuting 90 minutes each way a day because you have to. I think companies have realized it's a lot cheaper and better for health in a lot of ways to support remote work. And I think a lot of employees have realized it's an awful lot cheaper. I mean, I started working from home in 2006 and, I've got the same car I had back then because, I'm not putting a lot of miles on it right now. So I think that the office changes to more of a hotspot or a temporary workplace, and I think video will be everywhere. You can't have a meeting space, you can't have a cubicle, you can't have a desk where there isn't video because not everyone will be there. So you have to be able to have a video ability for those folks who are working remotely. I think the second thing I expect to see next year is that HR, facilities, and IT have to get a lot closer to one another. IT has always been in the business of let's roll it out, let's make sure it works. Hopefully nobody calls and complains. Let's move on to the next thing. They haven't been asked to work with HR to understand what the impact is of these tools, who's turning their cameras on or off, how does that correlate with job performance, how does that correlate with turnover? Can we start to pull analytic information that allows us to better manage that work from home population. I think that's going to be a major focus over the next year of what information can we learn and how can we use that information to improve the effectiveness of again, what I think will be predominantly a work from home environment.
Terrific. Thank you guys very much. That was terrific insights and great predictions for next year. Let me ask you all how people can reach out to you to get more information. David Smith, let's start with you. How can somebody reach you?
Sure. Thanks, David. They can reach me on Twitter at Dave Mario and also via email at dave@infloanalysis.com.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Dave. Blair, how can somebody reach out to you if they want to?
Yeah, on email, bpleasant@confusion.com, and on Twitter, Blair Plez, so BLAIRPLEZ.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Blair. David Maldow, how can somebody reach out to you as if you're not already all over the internet everywhere?
Well, the easiest way is probably Twitter at Let's Do Video. You could also email me at david@letsdovideo. And if you want to see some tutorials about how I do some of this stuff, you could check out the Let's Do Video YouTube channel.
So the similar part along all of those is Let's Do Video, right?
Yeah, that'll get me one way or another.
Okay, terrific. Brent Kelly, how can somebody get a hold of you if they want to get information about what you do, Brent?
Probably the easiest way to get me is through my website. That's www.kelcor.com, or I'm up on LinkedIn, or you can email me at bkelly, Kelly, @kelcor.com.
Thank you very much, Brent. And Irwin, how would somebody get more information about you and what you do?
Sure. Easiest way is to go out to Twitter. It's IMLazar, IMLAZAR at Twitter, and also on LinkedIn.
And thank you to all of my guests. Thank you very much for joining me for this one. This is going to be the last IMCCA webcast of the year. Because of that, I'm going to wish everybody who's watching, hopefully you're watching it sometime in the real time, a very safe, happy, healthy holiday season to the best of our abilities while we're quarantining or isolating ourselves as the pandemic passes. And I hope that as this dumpster fire of 2020 ends and we move into 2021, that everybody's going to have a better, healthy, happy, and prosperous new year. So for the IMCCA, I'm David Danto. You guys know you can reach me. Just Google David Danto or David J. Danto. I'm everywhere. I got like 19 emails. I'm all over the place. Thanks very much for watching, and we will see you on the next one. Take care.